What about genuine domestic violence, that actually involves a man or woman getting hurt by their partner? What about this battered woman there's so much talk about? The mythical battered woman. We hear about her so often, yet encounter her barely at all. I think I've yet to meet a woman that could take a battering. Yet the terms battered woman and wife beater are put about very frequently. It seems either that women are exceptionally tough, such that the internal injuries and broken bones they sustain on a daily basis just don't show, or else maybe, just maybe, they're not actually being battered. I mean, this is a beating.
This is both. Strong elbows to the head. He's out. He's out. My goodness.
This is a battering.
He's got to be in. Really tough. His corner probably throw the towel in on this one. It's over.
If poor women are enduring this every day at the hands of some evil husband or boyfriend, then hats off to them. They're tougher than any man I've ever seen or heard of. And according to this scaremongering campaign from Amnesty that we've been treated to on the London Underground, apparently these battered women are so tough that all it takes is a bit of makeup to cover up all that damage. How tough is that? Remarkable. My guess is that the words beaten and battered have very different meanings to hysterical females compared with rational people. In Britain and the US, it's been thought that the batterings that these women receive leads to something called battered woman syndrome. The idea was first proposed by Lenore Walker, a feminist psychologist. The concept is that women who are abused go through several stages of behaviour, which can then finally erupt into violence against the abuser. This eruption of violence from the woman is not a reaction in self-defence, but is a well-planned, lethal assault. In any other context, this is called premeditated murder, but not so with domestic violence. QC Helena Kennedy, MP Harriet Harman and others have tried to argue that there is some vital qualitative difference between females murdering males and vice versa. Kennedy argues that women experience. The argument in essence is that women kill for a good reason, whereas men kill because they're evil. This sort of twisted thinking is typical of women in our society. Women want to be treated the same as men, only until they see some advantage in claiming difference.
Harriet Harman was trying to make a case out if it was the battered woman syndrome. I think a woman wrote back in 1979 this thesis on a battered woman syndrome, which stated there was a cycle of abuse that went on, and then at a certain point when she couldn't take any more, she didn't snap and kill her husband, she would wait till he was asleep and then she'd kill him. Now, I don't know how you view that, but that leaves lots of nasties in the air, because how often could a woman kill her husband and then say, well, I suffered in silence for 10 or 15 years and then I decided to kill him. To kill somebody when they're asleep, I always think is a premeditated thing. To kill somebody either in self-defence or you finally snap and you get someone, you do it, all right, I can't imagine doing that sort of thing, but there's an element of, yeah, that could happen. Well, what Harriet Harman was trying to do was to say that women that killed men in their sleep certainly wouldn't be murder, and it might not even be manslaughter. Whereas if a man, because this was a male thing, okay, if he snapped and killed his wife, yes, that's murder. Where a man had snapped, they would take that partial defence away from him. So they'd put it in place for a woman that had bumped a bloke off in his sleep, but they would take the man having a final snap, they would actually remove that from him.
So for men that would mean more likelihood of conviction?
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely, yeah, that's the whole idea of it, yeah. Man convicted, woman let off, that's Harriet Harman's thinking. She don't like you, I can tell you. It would actually give women licence to murder men. You can't have a partial defence to murder that actually says a woman can kill a man, claiming that she's had years of domestic violence and claiming that she had to do it in the middle of the night when he was asleep. That to me is murder.
Poor innocent women are driven to the end of their tether by hateful, abusive men.
I don't even want to smell that stuff cooking.
And they finally snap. But rather than an understandable human reaction in self-defence, she responds with calculation and planning. She waits for him to go to bed, so that she can murder him while he sleeps. These murdering women are said to go through a stage of learned helplessness. They've become so demoralised by the violence of their husband or partner that they sink into a state of psychological paralysis and become unable to take any effective action to leave an abusive relationship. She can't pick up the phone and leverage the full weight of the state against her abuser, which most women could do. But she can successfully plan her revenge and execute premeditated murder while her husband sleeps, which most women couldn't do.
Do you think it's justified as self-defence for a woman to kill a husband or boyfriend if she's been beaten by him in the past?
I think that would certainly come into how it pans out on the trial. It would be a mitigating circumstance, yes.
Do you think that women should be allowed to commit premeditated murder in self-defence?
No. Premeditated murder is murder. If you're controlled enough to premeditate a murder because you're being abused, you're controlled enough to leave the man and get out of there. And if you choose not to and instead choose to kill the abuser, then you had a choice. And in court, in fact I was in a court case of, it wasn't a man and a woman, but it came down to, was it self-defense? And the basic question was, could you have walked away? That's the basic question. If you could have walked away, then it wasn't self-defense. So to bring that to this case of a woman suffering violence and then killing the man, could she have walked away? Well, yes. So then it wasn't self-defense. If a woman or a man, because let's switch around here, there are lots of men in abusive relationships. If it's easier, or rather if it's easier in your mind to kill him than to leave him, there is something fundamentally wrong with you, not with him. That's an awful reason to justify murder. You can be locked in mentally. When you've been abused for a long period of time, you can feel you have no other choice. You can feel that there's nothing you can do. However, women or men in those situations will not be able to think about getting somebody in to kill them, because they would be so locked in, they'll have no options open to them whatsoever. They're completely locked in. There's nothing they can do. If they're free enough and they're strong enough in their mind to come up with ways of killing that man, they're free and strong enough in their mind to come up with ways of leaving that man. It's ridiculous.
It also begs the question that given that you've got refuges all over the country and you've got helplines out for women all over the place and you've got police stuff, anything you want to look at, it's help is this way, why does she not access that help?
The concept of the battered woman has been effectively demolished by numerous studies that have been carried out according to the recognised rules of research, as opposed to feminist invention. The single most damning fact about battered woman syndrome is that basic scientific method wasn't followed.
The simple rules of science that you learn in your first days of secondary school.
Inexplicably, the responses of subjects were never recorded, so there's no way for anyone else to verify the study's data. The existence of battered woman syndrome is essentially pie in the sky.
Yet it's been used to deny justice to murdered men and dress up vengeful women as victims.
I mean, you've got some experts in methodology that actually went through her work and they just discredited it. They said even the women that she interviewed to support this cycle of abuse hadn't actually even killed a man.
Of course, some women are genuinely beaten, sometimes to death, and so are men, and so are children. But have you ever heard of a battered child syndrome, or a battered man syndrome?
Not only is battered woman syndrome still being used as a legal defence, but premenstrual syndrome has also been pleaded in cases of murderous females. PMS is the very same condition that can never be used against a woman if she's sacked from her job when she freaks out in the workplace.
Please stop throwing shoes at me!
Yet it's often used in her defence when she murders a man or her baby.
In fact, women seem to be afflicted by numerous syndromes, all of which allow them to kill in cold blood and be considered blameless.
Battered woman syndrome, premenstrual syndrome, Munchausen syndrome by proxy, whatever the crime, there's a female-only defence using some kind of syndrome.
Hey Lois, look at me. I got postpartum depression. Wah! I'm sad about stuff. Wah!
Men don't have the luxury of falling back on a syndrome when they commit crimes. No study has ever investigated how men might be affected by chemical or emotional conditions, and why men might kill. When men kill, they're just considered evil. In their eternal search for equality, it's odd that women are content to be treated differently in this regard.
An examination of homicide figures in Ireland between 1992 and 96 reports that the victim was male in 15 out of 20 cases committed by women, and in 35% of cases, a female perpetrator killed her husband.
The report concludes that females are far more likely to kill a spouse than their male counterpart, and they're also very unlikely to be punished.
But for some reason, we're never presented with facts like these on the news. The film Provoked is based on a true story in the UK, where a woman called Kiranjit Ahluwalia murdered her husband, Deepak Ahluwalia, by using napalm to set him on fire while he slept.
We had Kiranjit Ahluwalia given a bravery award by Cherie Blair for having set alight and killing her husband.
It wasn't petrol she used to burn him alive. She actually learned how to make napalm. Do you know how to make napalm?
If you reacted in self-defense against an abuser, do you imagine your response would be to learn how to make a chemical weapon and then use it on someone while they slept? This sort of calculated murder would seem more like revenge, and in English law, taking revenge is not considered self-defense.
However, her appeal against conviction was successful, using the defense of battered woman syndrome. On the face of it, it seems completely understandable that a woman could suffer abuse for years and then finally snap. And if she'd stabbed him with a kitchen knife when he was hitting her for the 100th time, I could understand that situation. But researching how to make napalm, preparing the mixture, waiting for him to go to sleep and then pouring the mixture over him, and then setting him on fire, that is simply not a human reaction in self-defense. I don't quite know how to describe the barbarity of such a crime. Anyone that kills like this should go to prison and should stay there for life.
The planned killing of her husband was successfully presented as self-defense, using an invented idea. One has to wonder at just how cheap a man's life has become. She served 3 years and 3 months for murdering her husband, even though a conviction for murder is supposed to carry a life sentence in the UK. And it gets better. After her release, she was presented with a medal for bravery by Cherie Blair, the ex-Prime Minister's wife, at the first Asian Women Awards.
Who was jailed for life for setting fire to her husband, has been honoured at an awards ceremony for breaking the taboo of domestic violence. A bravery award. What was she being brave about? She killed her husband.
Could you even conceive in some wild imagining, whatever the circumstances, whatever the provocation, could you imagine a man receiving a medal for murdering a woman?
This is the extent of the hatred directed at men from the highest levels of society. Cold-blooded murder is acceptable as self-defense if a woman is the perpetrator and a man is the victim. Looking into the commentary about this film, reviewers go out of their way to declare that Deepak deserved to die.
Yes, and it's possible he drank her blood and made her eat camel dung. We can't ever know, because it's not possible for a murdered man to defend himself. But the real issue is this.
How do you even know she was abused? Why else would you set your husband on fire? Because you ran out of charcoal?
If a man can deserve domestic violence, even unto death by burning, can a woman deserve it too? We once again come back to worthy and unworthy victims. A man can never be justified in his violence, whereas a woman must always be justified. Kiranjit has published an autobiography. It's available on Amazon at a very reasonable $14.85. Just as with Lorena Bobbitt, it seems that in our male-dominated society, women who murder or mutilate men do very well for themselves. This woman poisoned her husband by putting antifreeze in his food, leaving him brain damaged, blind, and partially deaf.
Needless to say, domestic violence wasn't mentioned in the media reporting of this poisoning case, even though it clearly qualifies. This is true of all reporting covering assaults and killings of men by women. Women's violence against men is almost never officially categorised as domestic violence.
The mythical battered woman. We hear about her so often, yet encounter her barely at all. I think I've yet to meet a woman that could take a battering. Yet the terms battered woman and wife beater are put about very frequently. It seems either that women are exceptionally tough, such that the internal injuries and broken bones they sustain on a daily basis just don't show, or else maybe, just maybe, they're not actually being battered. I mean, this is a beating.
What about genuine domestic violence, that actually involves a man or woman getting hurt by their partner? What about this battered woman there's so much talk about?
This is Bo. He's strong. Elbows to the head. He's out. He's out. My goodness.
This is a battering.
It's got to be in. Really tough. His corner probably throw the towel in on this one. It's over.
If poor women are enduring this every day at the hands of some evil husband or boyfriend, then hats off to them. They're tougher than any man I've ever seen or heard of. And according to this scaremongering campaign from Amnesty that we've been treated to on the London Underground, apparently Nor Walker, a feminist psychologist.
The concept is that women who are abused go through several stages of behaviour, which can then finally erupt into violence against the abuser. This eruption of violence from the woman is not a reaction in self-defence, but is a well-planned, lethal assault.
In any other context, this is called premeditated murder, but not so with domestic violence. QC Helena Kennedy, MP Harriet Harman and others have tried to argue that these battered women are so tough that all it takes is a bit of makeup to cover up all that damage. How tough is that? Remarkable. My guess is that the words beaten and battered have very different meanings to hysterical females compared with rational people. In Britain and the US, it's been thought that the batterings that these women receive leads to something called battered woman syndrome. The idea was first proposed by